Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 offers an automated auditing solution called Audit Workbench that allows you to create rich and flexible queries to support the variety of audit policies you may have in your organization. In this how-to video, I will walk you through creating different audit rule types that will then be used in an audit policy and customized to that policy's requirements. Upon completing the audit policy setup, I will execute the policy using the batch framework found in Microsoft Dynamics AX. The result of the policy's execution are one or more audit cases created automatically containing any violations to that audit policy. As an internal auditor at Contoso, I am able to go to the Compliance and Internal Controls module and define the audit rule types for Contoso. In the Rule Types form, you can see I've already created several different rule types that can be used in Contoso's policies. To create a new rule type, I'll select the new action and give it a name. The rule we'll be creating here is to look for duplicate expenses. Next, I need to select the query that we will use in this rule type. In the drop-down, you can see we can audit expense reports, purchase orders, or vendor invoices. I'm going to look for duplicate expense lines, so I'll select the expense report line query. Next, I need to select the query type that we'll use in this rule, and I'll go ahead and select duplicate. Next, I need to identify the field that stores either the legal entity or company ID for the expense report. And finally, I need to select the date field that I want to use in the table for purposes of auditing. Once I've created all my different rule types, I can then go ahead and create a policy for Contoso. Since Contoso is a global company, they may have different audit policies for each of their divisions. I'm going to create a policy for Contoso's US division. In the Audit Policy List page, I can select the new action to create a policy. I'll give the policy a name. Next, I need to identify the organization's companies or divisions that will be included in this policy. Next, I need to define the rules for the policy. In the list, you can see the 6 different rule types that I had previously created. We'll begin by creating a duplicate expense rule. I'll select my rule type and choose to create that rule. In the query form, I'll define my duplicates by using the Group By tab. In this policy, we've defined a duplicate by saying that any expense line that has got the same transaction amount, the same transaction date, is for the same employee with the same expense category will be considered a duplicate. Once I've defined my criteria, I can also set up an additional days to evaluate for duplicate rule types. What this is saying is if I execute this policy for expense reports in June, it will look back at May and April's expense reports to look for duplicates as well. I can also test my rule types immediately when I create them, so I don't have to wait until I have to execute the batch against possibly hundreds or thousands of documents. If I open up my rule again, I can select Test to test this on a smaller date range, or immediately test it against the documents I want. Once I enter a date range, I can click Run Test. In my results pane, I can see if I've gotten any of the expected results. Once I'm happy with the criteria that I've set up, I can then move on to the next rule. I'll also create a rule for keywords. Keywords may be words in your organization that anytime they appear on a document, you want them flagged for auditing. To set up your keywords, you need to go under Additional Options, and this is where you can start logging the keywords you want to use. For example, Contoso may have some strict anti-corruption policies, so anytime the word government shows up in an expense report, they want to take a closer look. So I can go ahead and enter the word government. Again, I continue to build out my library of keywords in the additional options form. Once I've entered the words I want, I need to create the policy rule and tell the system where I want it to look for those words. So I can go ahead and select the table and field that I want it to look for those keywords. And I could add as many different fields to this list that I want the system to look for. I could then continue to go on and build out all my rules for my policy, or if my policy only contains 2 rules, I could leave it at that. Once I've set up all my different rules, I can go under the additional options area again and enter in the date range that I want to use for executing my policy. We'll go ahead and select to run this policy for the expense reports in June. Next, I can click on Batch and execute this as part of my audit batch group. I could also set up a reoccurrence if I wanted my policy to run on a weekly or monthly basis. Once I click OK, you can see that it has added my audit policy to my batch queue. What the system is going to do now is look at all my expense reports in June to see if there are any violations with the rules that I have set up. If it finds any violations, it will group those in audit cases. By default, the system groups violations by rule type for creating cases. That would be to say, in my policy we had a rule type for keywords, so if it finds any violations against keywords, it will group all those violations related to keywords in one single case. There may be instances, though, where you want to group based on your document type on a different attribute. For example, maybe you want your expense reports grouped by your employees instead of by rule type. So that would say if a worker had any violations across the different rule types in a policy, it would take all those violations per worker and group those into a single audit case. Now that my batch should have completed, we can go to the audit list case and see if any cases were created. And here you can see 2 cases were automatically created for me, one for my expense keywords rule and one for my duplicate expenses. If I open up my audit case, the system should have automatically attached any of the documents that had violations to it under the Associations FAST tab. You can see I've got 2 expense reports attached to this audit case, and by taking a quick glance, it looks as though the transaction dates and amounts were in fact the same between the 2. I could also drill back on these expense reports if I wanted to view additional information about them. I could also have conversations with the employee entering the expense reports, and I can log all that information under my case log so that I can document all the research and conversations I had with this violation and bringing it to resolution. What you have seen in this how-to video is the ability to create a set of audit rule types that can be applied and customized to various audit policies in your organization. Those audit policies can then be set up to automatically execute, resulting in their creation of audit cases, allowing auditors to investigate any violations and track their progress to resolution.